All right, so people are still dropping in. And so we'll begin in a minute. I thought what we could do is check in the chat, and then we'll begin with a slightly longer meditation that'll be by way of review of what we were talking about last time. So if you'd like to open up the chat, which is if you're on a laptop, is at the very bottom of the screen, there's a little bubble that says chat. And I thought a fun way to do it is if you just enter into the chat where you're calling in from, and just a weather report. You can, just for fun, say how you're doing emotionally in terms of the weather, like it's sunny, partly cloudy, overcast, hurricane, typhoon, whatever you like to say about your translating your mood into a literal weather report. So we'll just kind of greet everybody like that. Banana slug speed, partly sunny in Santa Cruz. Seattle, it's always sunny on the inside. Foggy, bleach. Eye of the storm. Brentwood, sunny and mild. San Diego, warm and windy. Redwood City, overcast. Oh, that's Blad, not bleach. Good. All right. I was a little worried there. San Jose is mild. Los Gatos is mild. El Sobrante, overcast with gray clouds, but a little sun. Santa Cruz, partly cloudy. Meh. Tornado over the 14-year-old daughter's head. Don't 14-year-old daughters always have the tornado? Oh my goodness, no skull at all. Felton, creative interstorm. Santa Cruz, fog lifted and it's sunny. Seattle, mostly sunny, no complaints here. Santa Cruz, no rain in sight. All right. Great. All right. Thank you all for checking in. And so we'll begin with a meditation. And what I thought we could do last time, we were focusing on breath awareness meditation, or and we'll review a little bit the different kinds of meditation in a minute, but we were talking about focusing or single pointed concentration style meditation. And then the other style was analytical or a more conceptual meditation style. So I said for the first kind, we can experiment with the sensations of the breath in the body, or if for some reason focusing on the breath is kind of activating for you or triggering for you in any way, you can focus on a different physical sensation, maybe just other sensations in your body, your weight on the chair, your feet on the floor, other sensations, or even an external sensation, maybe the sound in the room or the environment that you're in. So you might have decided that the breath didn't work so well for you. It's pretty traditional object, and for most people it works well, but just notice whether that works for you. And so by way of reviewing, we're just going to do that practice for a couple of minutes, starting with settling into your posture. And we were talking about the 7 points of the posture. The most important part of the posture is to have your back as straight as possible, no matter whether you're sitting in a kind of an upright chair or a sofa. It's important to get a nice straight back. Now, we mentioned that an option is to do, when you're meditating, do the supine pose, especially if you have some physical problems, maybe something going on with your back or some kind of chronic pain. But mostly we sit upright with the back straight, shoulders even, and you have your head tilted slightly forward, your chin tucked in just a little bit. And we try and practice with our eyes kind of with a hooded gaze, if possible, rather than completely closed. And I'll talk about the reason for that when we get to the obstacle of dullness or sleepiness. But just letting a little light in, but not focusing on what's in our field of vision at all. And then your hands can be resting in your lap. The traditional posture is your right hand over your left and your thumbs touching and your elbows a little bit out. Or you can be resting your hands on your knees your legs. We're probably sitting up in a chair if we're in front of the computer. The traditional posture is a cross-legged posture. Sometimes hard to get that cross-legged posture, and you can adjust the cushions, put cushions under your knees if you choose to practice to try that nice stable cross-legged posture, or sitting up in a chair is fine. It's important to get your feet kind of spread apart so you have that nice stable posture. And so after settling the body in this way, the jaw and the mouth. So the jaw should be relaxed, not clenching your teeth, but if possible, breathing through your nose and not your mouth, unless you've got some kind of sinus obstruction, breathing through your nose. And if you have your tongue on the top of your mouth, right behind your teeth, up on your upper palate, that helps prevent you from needing to swallow constantly. And so after settling into that posture, let's just do a body scan, body sweep, and just checking for any tightness or tension. So starting with the attention at the very crown of the head, and then sweeping down through the muscles of the face, relaxing the forehead and the eyes, relaxing the jaw. Relax your tongue in your mouth. Sometimes we hold our tongue kind of tense. So really try and relax that big muscle of your tongue. And then your neck and shoulders that might need a little attention, especially at the end of a long day. And then sweeping down through your torso, relax your belly, relax your buttocks, sweeping all the way down to the feet. And then we'll round off this initial settling of the body with 3 deep diaphragmatic breaths. So breathing all the way down to the diaphragm, exhaling all the way. This helps to activate the soothing system. And then after those 3 deep breaths, just turning your attention to the sensations of the breath in the body. And as we talked about last week, we can either focus on the full body awareness of breathing, just wherever you notice the sensations in the body, or perhaps focusing on your abdomen, keeping the attention there, feeling your diaphragm rising and falling. Or maybe it's easier for you to follow the sensations in your chest with your lungs expanding and contracting. Or maybe your nostrils, the subtlest part of your body, feeling the air going in and out of your nostrils, maybe feeling the sensation on your upper lip. And whenever your attention wanders from those sensations, as it will over and over again, just release the distraction and return to the breath. You may have experimented with trying counting each cycle of exhalation and inhalation, 1, the next cycle 2, up to 10, and starting over again. Also starting over again when you lose track completely of the number that you're on. So we'll just continue practicing like this for a few minutes. Just practicing that awareness of the breath in the body, the sensations in the body. Whenever you notice you're distracted, your attention has wandered, just releasing the distraction and returning to the breath. Keep doing that over and over. Just taking a moment to gently come out of meditation. So that was kind of by way of reviewing a little bit what we were talking about last week in terms of the posture and the practice. And we're going to review in just a second the types of meditation. But I just wanted to see, one of the things I suggested last week was that you might like to practice this meditation on perhaps a daily basis, or at least 4 or 5 times in the week since last week's class. And I just wanted to open up for a minute to see if there's any questions that came up about that practice, either from your practice during the week, or if there was something that, just is kind of coming up theoretically. Patrick is going to be helping me. He's waving his hand. He's going to be helping me by keeping an eye on the chat. So if you've got a comment or a question, you can either unmute yourself or raise your virtual hand. There's a little blue hand that you can raise if you go into the participant window, or just unmute yourself or type a question into the chat. Any questions, concerns, issues with that breath awareness meditation? We'll just allow a couple of minutes to see if anything's coming up for folks. Okay, anything? Let's see. Okay, I see some things in the chat. One question, wondering when you say release the distraction, are there any methods that you suggest to do so? That's a great question. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is these two functions of mind for this kind of single-pointed concentration or focusing practice. One is just the part of the mind that stays on the object, that just stays focused on the object. And then there's another part of the mind, sometimes it's called vigilance or watchfulness, that notices when our mind has strayed away from the object. So release the distraction means first that you've noticed with that vigilance or watchfulness that there's some distraction present, right? You notice, oh, I got, if you were counting, I got up to 3 and now I have no idea what number I'm on or even why I'm sitting cross-legged on the floor. You just got completely caught up in like the vacation to Hawaii once coronavirus is over, or whatever it might be, right? So there's a part of your mind that notices, oh, wow, I was just totally off. That's the vigilance or watchfulness. And then the part of your mind that just brings your mind back to the object after you've noticed that it's off. So that's basically it. Those two qualities, the watchfulness that notices that it's off, and just the part that says, come back to the breath. So when I say release the distraction, it's dependent on noticing there's a distraction there. And then all you have to do is just bring your attention back to the breath very naturally. One of the things that tends to happen for people, especially in the beginning, is then there's a whole storyline about their distraction. Oh, what's wrong with me? I can't meditate. Oh my God, everybody else in the room is doing it so much better than me. Forget about it, right? Just gently, gently, gently. And remember at the end of the last class, I said it's like training a puppy to sit, right? And the puppy pops up and you put its little butt down again. So it's just over and over and over again. And if that's all that we do in the beginning, which mostly is, it's helping us to train that mind. So it's just gently releasing. Alan Wallace says, release and return, right? So that's the attitude.
Venerable, I've got
Yeah.
my sound working. There's two questions about the eye posture.
Yes.
One from Deb and one from Marty. And Deb wants to know, is it important to keep the eyes partially closed, or can we keep closed? Find desire to keep lightly closed. And then Marty says, I either have to close my eyes or they are fully open. I cannot do the small opening. Any suggestion?
Yeah, and it takes a while to get used to that. The reason for doing that, we're going to be talking tonight about the obstacle of distraction, but there's another obstacle, sometimes called dullness or sleepiness, and training from the very beginning in that hooded gaze really helps us when that distraction starts to come up. Usually the first distraction that comes up, or the first obstacle that comes up, is just a lot of distraction, lots of conceptual thought. But for some people, that sort of dullness or sleepiness comes up at the very beginning. It's really hard in the beginning to have that hooded gaze. It doesn't feel natural, but after a while with practicing with it, then it becomes really natural. You get used to it. I had a student many years ago when I first started teaching meditation. She would beg me to allow her to close her eyes. And I insisted that she try to keep the hooded gaze. And then we did a retreat. I think it was just a weekend retreat. And at the end of the retreat, she was like, oh, I tried to close my eyes and I couldn't. Like now my eyes just naturally go in that way. So I know it's really weird in the beginning to just train with the hooded gaze, but if you're really going to practice, and really try and perfect your meditation practice, it really, really does help to get into that good habit from the very beginning. We say that there's an obstacle we call subtle dullness. We'll talk more about it much later on, but it's often mistaken for a really good meditation session. It's this slightly buzzy, kind of spacey, and it feels really good. And you can sit for a long time in that subtle spaciness, mistaking it for a good meditation. And the antidote for that is having this a little bit of light coming in your eyes. So it's much easier to train like that and just get used to it from the very beginning. So I really recommend it. I mean, I can't make you do anything, but that's the reasoning behind training like that, because usually that obstacle comes up much later in the game, and then it's really hard to change your habits then. So even though it's hard, I do kind of, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't promise this, but I promise you, if you try, it does become easy with practice. It's kind of like everything else in the beginning. It's not a habit yet. It all feels weird, but it is really helpful to do. And it really will be the antidote for that other obstacle of the subtle dullness. Yeah. Patrick, anything else?
There's 3 comments about physical sensation. Ed asks, what about itches? Lillian brings up body pain distracting us. And JAJ mentions having ringing in my ears. It is always there. Over 20 years, I've learned to just let it be as a focus.
Yeah. And we'll talk, we're going to talk about the obstacle of physical discomfort a little bit later on in today's session. The ringing in the ears, if I have a friend who is a professional musician and he has like lost most of his hearing in one ear and has ringing in his other ear, and he just treats it as just another distraction and tries not to let it be a distraction at all, just ignores it. So if you've got something like that, it's good to just treat it like an external sound and just not let it be a distraction at all. Yeah. But we'll talk about the physical discomfort. That's one of the things we're going to be talking about tonight. Anything else? Okay. Are we good for now, Patrick?
Yeah, I think we're good for now.
Okay. All right. So let's review. I'm going to share my screen. I've got a couple of slides. One is just to review again the different types of meditation that we talked about. This is just by way of review of what we were talking about last time. We said there's this stabilizing, focusing, single-pointed concentration. These are all synonyms for that kind of meditation that we did just now of picking an object. Now, it can be an object like the breath. It can be a conceptual object. It can be a visualization. We'll experiment with some of these other objects. And then just bringing our attention back over and over and over to the one object. And then another style of meditation, analytical or conceptual, sometimes called checking meditation. And this has 2 styles. One is more of an insight meditation, where we're trying to get an insight into some aspect of the nature of reality, right? For example, impermanence, and that'll be the first analytical meditation we do. Next week, I want to stay with stabilizing and focusing for this week, and then next week we'll start with some of the analytical or conceptual. So one is to try and get an insight into some aspect of the nature of reality. And one interesting thing, because I know many of you might have had experience with Vipassana meditation, which now they're calling insight. They're insight meditation centers, right? They used to be called Vipassana. Some of you might be familiar with one of these words, Vipassana or insight. It's that kind of thing, getting an insight into the nature of reality. That's why they're called insight meditation, or Vipassana is the Pali word for that. There's another kind of analytical or conceptual meditation that involves developing or strengthening a certain quality. For example, we do conceptual compassion meditations, where we prime ourselves by thinking of an object of compassion, and then we try and deepen our compassion, spread it to different objects. So that's a different kind of conceptual or analytical meditation. And you'll see with these two styles, with all of them, really all four of these, that the idea that meditation involves somehow making your mind blank or getting rid of all thoughts or all objects of mind is not the way that we approach meditation in the Tibetan tradition. And in the Tibetan tradition, we actually say that's a misunderstanding of some of the fundamental meditation texts. We always have an object of mind. In fact, one of the words in Tibetan for mind is Yul Chen, which literally means object holder. So that's one of the names for mind in Tibetan, an object holder. So we either have one object that we're focusing on, or we're going through a conceptual process with different objects that we're trying to gain some kind of insight or develop a quality like compassion. And then the third kind of meditation, review or glance meditation, and we were talking about this a little bit last time in terms of some of the so-called prayers that we have, which are kind of poems of realization that we read just to remind ourselves of some of these virtuous qualities. Now, as we progress through the class, we'll see how most of the practices that we do are a combination of single-pointed and analytical. And what I mean by that is we analyze until we get some kind of insight, and then we try and strengthen that insight by focusing on it single-pointedly. Let's say we're doing an impermanence meditation. We're going through a thought process to try and get an insight about impermanence. And then sometimes we'll have a breakthrough or like an aha moment of like, oh, everything is changing moment by moment. Then we try and focus on that using that single-pointed concentration that we've developed, right? Through breath awareness or through our other practices. So what we usually do when we're doing an analytical meditation, they're much more powerful the more concentration that we've developed, the more single-pointed concentration we've developed. Because then when we get one of those insights, we can actually focus on it a lot more powerfully with that single-pointed concentration that we've developed. Okay, wanted to talk a little bit about the benefits of this style of meditation. So there's a word, calm abiding, that is a translation of a Tibetan word that refers to perfecting that single-pointed concentration. We're going to be looking a little bit later in the class about the stages leading up to that perfect single-pointed concentration. But this is what I was talking about last time when I said we have the ability with our mind to focus on any object that we want without distraction, with this perfect clarity and engagement. This is what we're trying to train our mind to do. And so some of the benefits of this, it just makes our mind peaceful. One of the side effects of developing just our concentration, even without any insight into the nature of reality, it feels really good. It creates a calm, peaceful mind. And I think we've all had the experience of when we feel that our mind is so incredibly distracted by so many, thoughts, so many things to do, so many things to think about, we feel kind of scattered. It doesn't feel good. So being able to have that kind of focused mind just subjectively feels good. We have increased control over our mind, and this has the side effect of reducing our disturbing emotions and giving us greater emotional balance. When we develop this kind of meditation or focused mind in meditation, we're able to do anything that we want. You're better at work. You're better at any of the projects that you try. It doesn't only function when you're sitting on your meditation cushion. You're able to do everything better with that kind of focused mind. All your other spiritual practices become much more powerful. We were talking about this last time and saying, let's say you're doing a compassion meditation with a really well-developed, focused mind, you're able in that 15-minute compassion meditation to actually be meditating on compassion for the whole 15 minutes instead of getting distracted by other thoughts. So it's obviously much more powerful. And then this kind of platform of that level of concentration is the basis of all spiritual realizations. It's necessary for what we call special insight, which is a deep insight into the nature of reality in Buddhism. And it has a side effect of mental and physical bliss and pliancy. So all of these are kind of the selling points for developing single-pointed concentration. Really, the last three are probably the most important in terms of our spiritual life and our spiritual practice, really developing that single-pointed concentration as a way of getting the insights into the meditative path, into the spiritual path. And then let's talk for a minute about some of the obstacles. Physical discomfort. We had a question about this a minute ago. So let's talk for a minute about physical discomfort. It can be really, I found when I feel a lot of physical restlessness, it's really a side effect of mental restlessness. So one of the things that I do first is really check, am I worried about something? Am I feeling anger? Am I feeling fear? Something like that. If my mind is restless, I'm fidgeting all over the place. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I can really sit physically, I can sit without moving for a really long time. So often I'll notice when I'm really, really fidgety, if I just check, what's going on in my mind? It's really mental restlessness. I don't really have to keep changing my position all the time. And then that sort of gives me permission to just stay in my meditation posture and not move around. So checking first, is it just mental restlessness? Sometimes it's helpful to just observe the pain and see if you can change the label to sensation. Now, I don't want anybody to tear your meniscus in your knee or do anything like that at all. But it's interesting, often when we feel that kind of restlessness and we'll think that there's something in our body that we have to move, if we change the object for a moment, let's say the knee, because when we're sitting cross-legged, that's usually what it is that hurts. If we just turn our attention to the knee and just focus on the sensation in the knee, often the label pain just sort of disappears and it just becomes a sensation, right? So often that's a way of dealing with it. Just temporarily take the focus off the breath onto the knee or whatever part of the body and just observe it and see if it changes to sensation. Often it will, and then you don't have to move, you just turn your attention back to the breath. Having said all of that, it's really important when you begin to meditate that you're in a really good, comfortable posture with the right kind of cushions. If you set yourself up well at the beginning, a lot of these problems won't happen. Then doing the body scan, and that's kind of like what we did at the very beginning of the session, starting at the top of the head, traveling downwards through the body. If you concentrate briefly on each part and consciously letting it relax and imagining the tension dissolve. So I usually do this before every meditation, even before focusing on the breath and settling my mind, I'll go ahead and do a body scan. One thing that you can do when you're feeling some kind of tension or pain, just imagine with each exhale that the tension or pain just leaves the body. You might even want to visualize it as something like a cloud of smoke just leaving your body with each exhalation. So that's one way you can just visualize the tension or pain releasing from your body. And then another technique, and these are kind of in order of, try the first one. If that doesn't work, try the second one. If that doesn't work, try the third one. It's sort of in order of magnitude almost of whether it works or not. Then hollow body meditation. And this a lot of my students who have had some kind of chronic pain or something really going on in their body have found this is really, really helpful. And so before we turn to the object of the breath or whatever our chosen object is, we can just start with a hollow body meditation. And what you do, this is a visualization. You start at the center of your chest and just imagine that all of the internal solid parts of your body dissolve into light, okay? And so your skin becomes like a balloon, a very thin membrane of light to enclose this empty space. And even though it's just a visualization, a lot of my students that have some kind of chronic pain or something going on in their body have found this really, really helpful. If they do this practice before they start to meditate, then they've been able to, you know, really sit without pain for quite a while. So here's some of the suggestions for physical discomfort. And I'm going to stop sharing here and just see if there's any questions, any additional questions about physical pain while we're on this topic. Yeah, and you can just unmute.
I just have a comment, which is that hollow body one just sounds lovely.
You can do it even if you're not in chronic pain. You can just do it because it feels good. Yeah, it's fine to do. You know, you're just like a balloon of light. It's really, really helpful, you know. Yeah, and I find it helpful at the end of a long day when my old tired body just feels like a lot. And so it's kind of nice to do to give that feeling of buoyancy. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking, you know, like if you feel a headache or you're just, you know, you're in your car and you're not driving, just taking a minute to just even do that. That just sounds helpful and lovely. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. You know, I think I mentioned last time I had two students, one of whom had actually fallen off his garage roof and broken his back. And he was just in incredible pain all the time. Another one had a developmental disability with her spine. And they both found, like I think I was mentioning last time, neither one of them told me what was going on for a long time, and they were struggling to sit in the posture and feeling so much pain. And then both of them, they found that one, the hollow body, and doing the supine when they were really in a lot of pain, just doing like the yoga corpse pose, then they were able to meditate. So, you know, it really, really does help, even though it's, you know, it's just a visualization, but the mind is so powerful.
Yeah, I love that corpse pose too, but I think I'd be asleep in 3 minutes.
Yeah, doesn't work for me at all. Yeah. Yeah, Dana, you got your hand up.
So I have this thing where I don't want to get too comfortable in like my setup, because for whatever reason I have in my head of like these stories of these monks that were like in jail and like were able to meditate in all of these crazy horrible situations, and whatever in my mind is like, oh, I want to like be able to meditate like on the floor without cushions, like I don't know how to like quite express what it is that I want.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. And you know, I think in the beginning, it's already hard. So we don't have to make it harder. And it's awesome when our mind is really well trained, then we will be able to meditate like in the crazy train station in Delhi. You know, I had friends when I was living in India and they're like, oh, I should be somewhere noisy to train my mind to like deal with noise. And I'd be like, you know what? Why don't you make it good in the beginning? And it's kind of like develop the muscles, and then you really will have the capacity later on that you're not as bothered by things. And the metaphor often given, you know, in the time of the Buddha, it was these agrarian cultures and societies that had a lot to do with farming. So all of these metaphors are very agricultural. And so they say, like when you build a sapling, you know, you put like a deer fence around it and you protect it and you give it a lot of water and fertilizer and just baby it, nurture it. And then by the time it's a huge oak tree, then it'll be strong, right? And so I think if we think of our minds like this in the beginning, is like, we're just a little sapling when we're just starting. Like, don't, do whatever you can to protect your mind, to have it kind of grow that capacity, right? And then it'll be great, because then when you're in the noisy train station or wherever it is, or when they throw us all into the concentration camp, then we'll be ready. Sorry, not even funny these days, sorry. But we need to kind of grow the capacity by setting up the conditions well. That's why we have meditation retreats in these beautiful, quiet places. We don't build the retreat center in the middle of, Grand Central Station in New York City. We build them in the Redwood Forest at Land of Medicine Buddha, because why not, set it up well in the beginning to be able to get used to it. Yeah.
I think maybe also is having in my mind not to be attached to whatever setup I have, right?
Yeah.
With the setup, but then also strive to say, okay, I can also meditate in other setups.
Yeah. And I think that's good, having that kind of flexibility, because if you have to have the one cushion and then you go away and forget it, and then you can't feel like you can't meditate for 2 weeks because you forgot your cushion on vacation, then that's a little rigid too. So once again, like the Buddha kept saying over and over again, the middle way, right? Without needing it to be like a certain way. And it's interesting, in the life story of the Buddha, talking about the middle way, one of the meanings of that is a middle way between sensory indulgence on the one hand and these really extreme ascetic practices on the other hand. So we're not meant to sort of set ourselves up for incredible hardship. Like, it's fine to be comfortable and not go to either extreme. I mean, if the Buddha, in fact, anyway, that's a whole nother story to do with Buddhism. There's a cool story about his cousin who wanted things to be way more strict. And then the Buddha pushed back and said, no, it's fine to be in the middle, like just comfortable enough. But then, like you say, Dana, not to be so attached that you're just thrown off completely if things aren't perfect. That's important too. Yeah. Any other questions about the posture? And then we'll go on and talk about distraction. One thing I wanted to say too is, it's interesting when we talk about meditation, there's a Tibetan word for meditation that comes from a root that means habituation or familiarization. So what we're really trying to do when we meditate is not get 20-minute oasis of calm out of our crazy day. It's nice, but it's not the point. The point is habituating or rehearsing for the other 23 hours and 45 minutes of the day, right? So thinking of our meditation, so whether we're developing that focus, developing that compassion, developing that insight, the whole point of doing it on the cushion for 20 minutes a day is to take that energy out to the rest of our lives, right? So I think that's another wrong view people sometimes have about meditation, is it's like, oh, just a brief little oasis from the chaos to get you grounded, and then you just go back to chaos. But if you're not going back to chaos with some learning from the meditation cushion, you're not really doing the practice well. So keeping that in mind, that habituation or familiarization. So what I want to talk about, our first obstacle that I want to talk about is distraction, because that's usually what comes up the most for people when they start to meditate. Anybody distracted from the sensations of the breath at all during that 10 minutes? Maybe a couple of people? Okay, I see some. I'm joking. I would imagine it would probably be everyone. And so one of the things that happens sometimes is when people begin to meditate, they go, oh my God, my mind is worse than it's ever been before. Has anybody thought that? Like, it just made my mind worse. No, as a matter of fact, it's just that we never tried to focus on an object without distraction. especially something as boring as the breath for 10 minutes. Like, who would do that? It's crazy. It's only if you're learning to meditate do you do that. So it's not making our mind worse. It's just that usually when we have a thought, we just follow it. The minute we have a thought, we just let it go, right? Follow it to its conclusion. You don't try and release it and return back to an object like the breath. So often we feel like it's made our mind even worse, but it hasn't really. It's just that we're noticing it for the first time. Some people, it's important our attitude towards our distracting thoughts. I've also had a lot of people ask me, oh, but my thoughts are so important. Is it okay if I keep a pad of paper and a pen next to my meditation cushion so I can write down these incredibly important thoughts? You can imagine what my answer is. No, that's not okay either, right? If it was that important, it'll come up in 20 minutes when your meditation session is over. So it's important, the attitude that we should have when we're meditating. We should decide the object of meditation before we get on the cushion. Also, don't get on the cushion and go, okay, I'm going to start with my breath. And then after 4.5 minutes, you're like, well, that's not really working out. Maybe I'll switch to compassion. 7 minutes in compassion. Okay, I'm kind of done with that. I think I'll switch to something else. So we're supposed to do all that thinking before sitting down on the cushion. Just decide what it's going to be for that session and stay with it, right? So even those thoughts we shouldn't pay attention to, and just let the thoughts go. Whether you think of it as an important thought or a stupid thought or a fun thought or whatever it is, just let it go. We have 3 major flavors of distracting thoughts, and I'm talking about internal mental distractions right now. We can have external distractions as well, like the sounds, but usually what we can try and kind of deal with is the internal distractions of our thoughts. One kind of distracting thought is just thinking about anything pleasant that you want to do next. Just your mind going to a pleasant, distracting object. This is like 99.5 to 9% of our distraction. Food, vacation, sex, walk on the beach, whatever it may be, whatever your flavor of pleasant, I want to do that next. That's mostly what our mind is doing. And this isn't a Buddhist philosophy class, but when we talk about attachment, it's our mind just wanting the next pleasant experience. And so that's mostly where our mind is going in our meditation practice. And then maybe 1 out of 1,000 times, it goes towards an object of aversion, which doesn't happen as often, but it will ruin your meditation session. If you sit down to meditate and you're really pissed off at somebody, yeah, see how that works out for you, okay? Objects of aversion are a lot harder to let go of than objects of attraction. So that's another kind of flavor. And then what are you doing? You're just rehearsing how you're going to get back at that person, the next smart alecky thing you're going to say to them when you see them at work tomorrow, whatever it may be. So that's another distraction. Another kind of distraction for spiritual, practitioners or followers that is especially dangerous is the distraction of thinking of another virtuous object, because we think that's okay. If I'm supposed to be meditating on my breath and I'm planning the next course I'm going to take at Land of Medicine Buddha when they finally open up, because it's something good, then we think it's okay to be distracted by that. But that distraction, we just count it as just another distraction, just like anything else. Okay, so those are kind of the 3 main flavors. The one that happens the most is distraction about pleasant sense objects. That has a special name in the Buddhist kind of guidance about meditation. It's called excitement. And it doesn't mean the kind of excitement of like riding on a roller coaster. It just means excitement is defined as your mind going towards a pleasant sense object. All of these are seen as equally distracting. Both the objects of attachment, the objects of aversion, and the virtuous objects are all seen. If you've decided that 20 minutes is going to be on the breath, Don't let any of those, they're not any one better or worse than the other ones. They're all equally seen as distractions, okay? So what do we do about them? And I'm going to share my screen again, and we'll talk about some of the antidotes to distraction. And so the first, this is again kind of an order of magnitude. Try the first ones. And by the way, you should have gotten a PDF from Patrick if you registered for the class. And you have all of these notes in that PDF from Patrick. So you're welcome to take notes now, but you will have all this information. So the first thing to do, check your posture. And actually, we were talking about that last week because Linda was asking about that. First course correction is external before we go to the internal antidotes. Check your posture. Make sure your spine is straight and your chin slightly tucked down. Sometimes what happens, I'll notice this, if my mind is just spinning out with distraction, I've done this. My chin is all the way up and my head is back. And so just straightening up and tucking your chin in, sometimes that's all you need to do to just sort of settle and calm down your mind. Reducing the amount of light in the room. Now, you can't do this if you're meditating in a group with other people, but sometimes when the light is too bright, it can just sort of send your mind into overdrive mode. So maybe reduce the amount of light in the room. A lot of people in the room where they meditate, they have those dimmer switches so they can really make those adjustments. Also make sure whatever in front of you isn't distracting, right? Don't make, like when you're lying on your back looking at the clouds and you're like, oh, that one looks like a dragon and that one looks like a lion. We can do that with rugs and fabrics and brocade and all kinds of things. There's one Zen tradition where people meditate facing a blank wall. That can be good. Or just make sure that whatever, because remember, we're having our eyes kind of lidded, we're trying to. So whatever is in the field of vision is not distracting like that. And then mental antidotes. So try those two external physical ones first, and then starting with the antidotes. Now, this first antidote is very counterintuitive. And I remember last week I was saying, one of my many pet peeves is these books about how to meditate that are like 2 paragraphs. Oh, watch the breath and let go of distractions. End of story. Because this first antidote is really counterintuitive, because often when our mind is distracted, we want to bear down, clamp down, tighten up. But that just makes us more distracted. And so backing off, lightening up, loosening up a little bit mentally, right? There's a metaphor given of like holding a cup, and holding the object in meditation is just like when you're holding a cup gently. You don't want to grab it so hard that you crush it, and you don't want to let it so loose that you drop it, but it's just holding it. Right? And so again, this kind of balance between too tight and too loose. And often when our mind is stirred up and distracted, we clamp down more, which just makes it worse. So this is, really remember this one and try and practice this one. Moving to a different meditation object briefly. And again, if the lightening up and loosening up doesn't work, you need an object that gets you back into a serious state, especially if the distraction is some kind of pleasant sensory object. If you have had Buddhist teachings and you know meditations on impermanence, also think about your motivation for meditating, your determination to look at your mind, to try to get yourself back into a serious state of mind. What really works for me is something like, look, you're meditating for 20 minutes. You can think about all that other stuff after the 20 minutes is over. This is a really important thing that you're doing to train your mind. You can fantasize about those vacations, when the 20 minutes is over, just as a way to kind of get serious. And then that really helps settle the mind. If that doesn't work, going back to the breath for a while, if you're on another object, and the breath is the antidote to having a distracted mind. This one is a little bit drastic, right? And this is kind of if all else fails, if you're on another object like compassion or impermanence or a visualization, go back to the breath for a while and then go back to your chosen object. So these are the antidotes to distraction. And we're going to meditate in a minute, but any questions about those antidotes before we do the practice? Okay, I don't see anybody at the moment. Let's do a practice and then we'll have a couple of minutes for questions at the end. So what I want to do for this practice, we'll continue with the breath for this session. And what we're going to do now is a technique for training that vigilance or that watchfulness. Remember I said our mind has two functions that we're trying to develop during this single pointed concentration. One is bringing our mind back to the object when we notice that we're distracted, right? So just pulling back the attention to the object. And then the second kind of faculty of mind we're trying to train is this vigilance or watchfulness that notices when we're off. Now, the point of training this is when we begin to meditate, sometimes we'll be deep into that fantasy about our next vacation. We've just been lost in that for 10 minutes. You kind of come to and you wonder what you're doing sitting cross-legged on the floor, right? And because you're so far off. But if we can train that vigilance to kick in quicker and quicker and quicker when we're off the object, obviously then we're not going to waste so much time. It doesn't really work if in every 15-minute meditation session we're off the object for 10 minutes. But if we train that watchfulness and then in the end it notices the minute we're off, it kicks in and then we know to bring our mind back to the object. One way of doing that is to do a practice where when we notice that we're off the object, we just label the kind of the characteristic of distraction before we move back. For example, we can, thinking about my vacation, sound outside, pain in the knee, planning for tomorrow. So when that distracting thought or sensation comes up, just labeling it and going back to the breath. Now, for some people, labeling it needs to be very, very simple so you don't get into a whole story about the label, right? Otherwise, you're like thinking about how my husband didn't do the dishes tonight and he never does the dishes and we're going to have a conversation to figure that out. And then that's a whole nother storyline. So sometimes even just labeling very simply, thought, sound, sensation, memory, plan, like that can be even more helpful than the kind of longer story about it. But this gets us used to the typical quality of our distraction. And you notice after a while, it's always a memory, or it's always a plan, or it's always a certain kind of flavor. It's always one of those, nice sense objects that I'm thinking about. Yeah, Linda, I see your hand up.
What about emotion? How do you label that?
Emotion too. Just label it emotion, or label it anger, or label it fear, or label it anxiety. Yeah, great question. Yeah, we can either label it simply as emotion, or you can identify what the emotion is. If it's obvious what the emotion is, but another thing that you can do is even more basic, pleasant, unpleasant, right? Even more basic, or just emotion. Yeah, whatever works for you. And this can be a way, I think of it as almost like you label and then it's sort of bouncing off the distraction back to the breath. The minute you notice, you label, and it's sort of a way of like pushing back and then going back to the breath. So we'll try that and see how that works as a way of training that vigilance or that watchfulness. And you notice with time, you're off the object less and less and less because you've trained that vigilance. It kicks in quicker and quicker and quicker. So what we're going to do, we're just going to do about 10 minutes of breath awareness practice again. And in this session, just do the labeling and come back to the breath. Again, release and return, but before you release, just identify the distraction and come back to the breath. Okay? So let's go ahead and get in our, oh, you know, why don't we stand up and just stretch for a couple of minutes because we've been sitting for about an hour. Let's take a 2.5 minute bio/stretch break and then come back. Okay. So we'll do this breath awareness practice with labeling the distraction for about 12 minutes or so, and then we'll have a couple of minutes to see if there are any questions that came up. So let's get in our comfortable meditation posture, again, settling in with our back straight, shoulders even, your hands either in your lap or on your knees, trying to have that position with our eyelids of kind of a hooded gaze, your tongue on the top of your mouth right behind your teeth, legs crossed, or if you're sitting up in a chair, in a nice stable posture. And then just I won't lead you through a full body scan because we did that before, but go ahead and just check if there's any tightness or tension that's crept in as we've been sitting here, and just trying to deliberately relax. And I know it's kind of late, the end of a long day, but just trying to relax. Taking a couple of moments, maybe doing one of those, if you're feeling any bodily pain, maybe trying to take a minute to do one of those practices like letting go of the tension and pain with the exhalation, maybe taking a moment to do the hollow body practice. Just imagine everything dissolving into light. So just taking a moment to settle your body. And then after settling the body, we'll just take those 3 deep breaths, those deep cleansing breaths. And then turning the attention to the breath. And again, by now you might be familiar with which part of the body works the best for holding your attention. Maybe the wide angle lens of the whole body awareness of breathing, or maybe focusing on your abdomen, or maybe your chest, your lungs expanding and contracting, or maybe that subtle sensation of the breath in your nostrils. So just turning your attention there, and we'll continue practicing with the sensations of the breath. And then when you notice that you're distracted, when you notice your attention is off, just label the distraction. And you might like to use the simple labeling like sound or sensation or memory or emotion, plan. So identifying what was the distraction that took you away from the breath, and then returning. Just kind of using that labeling as a way to kind of push off and release and return to the breath. And so training that watchfulness to label the minute you notice that your attention is off, release and return over and over to the sensations of the breath. So very gently releasing the distraction when you notice that you're off the sensations of the breath, not struggling, not fighting. Just label the distraction, release, and return to the breath. Just relax your posture and just take a moment to gently come out of meditation. And so for the next week, it might be helpful to practice with that technique as a way of training that ability to notice when you're off the object, training that vigilance or that watchfulness. As our meditation progresses, at the beginning, we talk about these two extremes of distraction on the one hand and dullness on the other hand. And it's almost like we're ping-ponging from one to the other. And then both of the obstacles get subtler and subtler. And then we notice quicker and quicker. And it's kind of these mid-course corrections and fine tuning until we're able to mostly be on the object. And then we just go off for a tiny bit of time and then come right back on again. So in the beginning, we might kind of feel like we're all over the place, but with time, it just sort of narrows the amount of time that we're on the obstacle, the extent of the obstacle, and then we're able to mostly be on the object all the time. So I wanted to open up again and see if there are any questions or comments about how that labeling practice worked out. And did you maybe notice that it was always the same distraction, maybe a mental one? We have our Jack Kornfield, this meditation teacher, calls it the top 10 tunes. Jenny, yeah.
For me, there's a lot of planning things, you know, the scheduler. Oh, did I do that thing? I should call that person. We need to organize the thing, you know?
Right, right.
And there was one thing where I was like, that could be labeled as these 3 things. Okay, let's not get over crazy about the labeling. We're trying to focus on the breath, you know? I'm like, that was in the past and thinking, you know, anyway.
Yeah, we don't want to label the distraction and then the distraction just becomes labeling, right? Which can also happen. But it's interesting too to notice, you know, as an extra thing, what is the nature of our common distractions? And then maybe spending some time off the cushion, seeing what's behind that. You know, if we notice that there's something, it's always rumination, or it's always planning, or it's always something. And then you might want to investigate, not in the middle of that session, because that was meant to be a session on the breath, but maybe just doing some journaling or some other way of investigating, well, what's up with all the planning? You know, is it that things seem uncertain, or, you know, is it giving me some solidity? Whatever, you know, it's kind of interesting to investigate if we feel like there's a theme to our distraction. It's not just all over the place, but it's got like a theme. So
Yeah.
that can be interesting. Yeah.
Also, sometimes when I'm like space out to wherever I go, I'm like, and then I kind of come back and I'm like, you know, if it slips off into some kind of like fantasy thing, right, where there's some film playing, then I'm like, was it a second, or like, is the 10 minutes up? Because it's like time warp. It's like a dream, right? It's like time warp. And I'm like, anyway.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. Dana, and then Harrison, and then Carol.
I actually found that I was getting distracted by the labeling. Like, so I'd have a thought, I'd go back to my breath and be like, oh, I had a thought, I should label that, right?
Oh.
Like, and so I don't know, for the exercise, I mean, was it mostly to get used to labeling? I mean, there were some longer thoughts that I was like, oh, I like caught myself like thought or whatever, because I couldn't get into the story because I was thinking, oh, what kind of thought, right? Like I could tell that was difficult. But also just kind of grouping those categories together. Was that important part of the exercise, or if it's distracting, should I just kind of let it be?
Yeah, not so important to group the categories together. It's just that some people find the labeling trains their watchfulness so that it kicks in quicker. That was kind of the point of this. Like, if that watchfulness, like if we're noticing quicker by labeling the distraction, that was kind of the point. And then, like what I was saying to Jenny, it can also be interesting to think about if you do also notice, oh, the distraction all has the same flavor, and then maybe give some thought to what that's about. But yeah, I think, like you say, we can get over analytical about the labeling, in which case, if we feel that's our tendency, just go as simple as possible, maybe just thought, sensation, sound, or something like that, just those 3. But it can help as a way to like,
I actually like
get the
go
watchfulness
to like even just be like, oh, I was distracted.
Yeah. And it's just an experiment, and it helps for some people, and for some people it's just an extra distraction. So it's just to experiment. It doesn't work for everyone, but I've noticed with some people it does work to train that watchfulness to kick in quicker? Yeah, good question. Let's see, we had Brent and Carol.
Hi. So
Yeah.
I've been outside today. I wasn't able to use my office space today. So there was a lot of sounds that I noticed.
Yeah.
And there was I did way too much labeling, and that the labeling itself became a distraction. But I can't help but just notice all the sounds that were around me. But I could return to my breath.
Yeah. And sometimes I had a friend who was a Buddhist nun, and there was this Dharma center in San Francisco, and it was on this incredibly busy, noisy street corner where there was buses going by and like people with boom boxes in their cars and just so loud. And she would use those like lawnmower canceling headphones. Like she would actually put in earplugs and the canceling thing just because she didn't want to have to struggle with it. I mean, here you are, it looks beautiful. I didn't know if this was a virtual backdrop, but it looks like it's a real tree. And not always the best place to meditate if there is. It was kind of like Dana's question of like, make it as supportive as possible, especially in the beginning. So here you are today, and you might not want to buy the lawnmower headphones just for one day, but if there is a situation where there's going to be a lot of distracting noise, maybe just earplugs or something like that. Yeah, because otherwise it is just too much. Then you're like label, because there's just too much going on externally. And we'll talk as the class progresses, maybe next time or the week after, we'll start talking about some of the conducive conditions to set up for yourself for, beginning to really set up a regular meditation practice. And one of them is, as non-distracting as we can get it. So as quiet as possible, where you're not going to be interrupted, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Carol.
Yeah, I was surprised. I had a lot of thoughts come in, replaying the day, but then I was able to get into a place where I would think, nice thought for later and put it aside. Kind of like I was in the kitchen and I don't need that ingredient right now, but not obliterate the thought. It's relevant, but like you said, I can deal with the thought better if I do this time, and so I did several times. It was like, nice thought, go away for now. Nice thought, go away. And I was really pleasantly surprised that I was able to focus again.
Yeah, awesome. I love that, because I think like I've mentioned a couple of times, I think what often comes up when people are starting is they're just fighting with their mind and just struggling. And they're like, no, I've got a thought again. But I love this idea of just gently going, oh, sweet little thought, I'm just going to park you over there for later. I think there's one meditation teacher, I don't know who it is, who talks about having like the parking lot and just put them in the parking lot for now. Like the spice cupboard analogy. No, I really don't need cumin for this dish. I'll just put it back in the cupboard for now, instead of fighting and struggling and making our thoughts the enemy, because they're not. So having that gentle, accepting approach, but just go, nice thought, not right now. I'll thank you in 20 minutes when the meditation session is over.
Yeah, put it back in the queue.
Yeah, right, exactly, with all the others that are coming. Good. So what I'd love for you to do is practice with this technique for the next week and just see how that works with the labeling. Just notice if you find that the labeling of the thought just really doesn't work for you at all and is just way more of a distraction, that's fine. Just, see if that works, see if it doesn't. If it doesn't, if it just feels like it makes your mind too busy, that's okay to let it go. But we'll maybe just investigate that for the next week. Then next week, what I'd like to do is start with the more conceptual, analytical meditations with that style of practice, now that we've kind of laid a bit of a framework with the single pointed concentration. And then next week, we'll review the obstacle of distraction and then talk about the opposite, which is dullness or sleepiness. So instead of our mind being too stirred up, our mind is too dull and sometimes doesn't stay on the object because it can range from just sort of spaciness to like literally falling asleep on the meditation cushion, which has happened. People have fallen off their chairs in the middle of a meditation. That can be amusing for everyone else but them. So we'll talk about the obstacle of distraction. What we'll do to finish off, and I think I mentioned this last time, often when we do our practice, we start with setting our intention, and then we end by dedicating all of the positive energy of our practice towards our spiritual goals. So let's just take a minute to just reflect on the positive energy that we spent here tonight for an hour and a half, trying to engage with these ideas, trying to learn how to meditate well, learning about the obstacles and the antidotes and doing practice. And then let's dedicate the positive energy, thinking of your own personal spiritual goals and dedicating the positive energy towards your individual goals. And then also let's try and dedicate that all of the spiritual practice that we do benefits not only ourselves, but all living beings, that we're able to really bring benefit to others through our spiritual practice as well. Thank you all for your attention and have a great week. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next Wednesday. And if you want to unmute and say goodbye to your classmates.
Thank you so much, Venerable. Thank you,
Bye,
Patrick.
everyone.
Thank
you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Venerable Tenzin.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
Be safe.
Bye. See you next week.
Bye.
you.